Hello and welcome to Sense in the City. I'm Ruby Bookaboo, the co-founder and your Sydney host, and I'll be taking you on some sensory adventures in and around the Emerald City. In episode 11 of Sense in the City Sydney, I visit Marc Kuzma, chef and owner of one of the best restaurants in Sydney, Claire's Kitchen, and upstairs cabaret room Le Salon. Marc is originally from Champagne in France, and I've known him for quite some time, having tap danced with his famous drag queen alter ego, Claire de Lune, many years ago, and more recently performing at Le Salon in my cabarets Paris by Night with Courtney Severini and Marc Harris, and Promenade à Paris with Chris Cody, who features in episode 1, Daniela Barda and Mark Zetto. Check the show notes for dates. Today we talk about Marc's first impressions when arriving in Sydney in 1979, how he serendipitously became a chef, and the story behind Claire's Kitchen. He tells us what his perfect 24 hours in Sydney would entail, what's coming up at Le Salon, and how they're involved in Pride. Also, what dishes on the menu are especially delicious, including the cheese soufflé. He's made over 60,000 of them. And just before we sit down to chat, puts 2 trays in the oven.
You are at Claire's Kitchen. You're quite familiar with Claire's Kitchen because you've performed here quite a few times, always sold out show. And we are in a main restaurant. The restaurant opened, 11 years ago already. Crazy in February. And we started as a French restaurant downstairs, and then we opened the cabaret room upstairs. And that's been going now for over 5 years, and is getting stronger and stronger. We do up to 4 shows a week.
Que reste-t-il de nos amours? Que reste-t-il de ces beaux jours? Une photo, vieille photo de ma jeunesse.
What inspired you to open this restaurant
Well,
and the cabaret?
I was working at Slide next door for 14 years, running El Circo and the club and the restaurant. And this little business was a hairdressing salon next door. And it came up for rent, and we decided to take it over. Open first a little American style bar. I can't even remember. It was called Gotham. Yeah. And unfortunately, it didn't go quite well with the local clientele. They didn't think that we needed another bar. So the boss said to me, "What will you do with it?" I said, "Well, why don't we open a little French restaurant and call it Claire's Kitchen?" Because, of course, Claire is a lot more known than I am.
Mm-hmm. So for people who don't know Claire...
Claire started on television in 1998 in Australia with Carrie Ann on the midday show doing cooking segment.
So Claire is your alter ego.
So my alter ego, yeah. And then she went on to do more television work on Room 208 on Channel V for 2 years.
Which is where, do you remember where I met you?
Yes.
At a restaurant where everyone had to wear hats.
Oh my
Remember?
God, Terrence.
How
many years ago? You must have been a child.
I was waitressing like every Saturday night, and then I had at the end of the night everyone would have a drink, and you came in and someone said tap, and I tapped in and said, "You are a star, come dance on my TV show." And then I came and tapped on 208.
On 208.
I have footage somewhere
crazy.
of it. And you did history repeating. Like,
Yeah.
Oh my backup dancers.
Well, we go back a long way then.
Oh gosh, I know. And then you were doing lots of other gigs around town. I remember we did something at Home Nightclub.
Yes. I was running Home Nightclub at the entertainment with Verushka Darling for Home Nightclub. So that was quite cool too. Yeah.
You're quite involved in the cabaret scene, obviously, in Sydney.
Well, you know that I'm also a performer, obviously, so I always missed the entertainment business. This is why I created the cabaret. So I'm always working, so I don't have time to go and see shows. So what I did is I brought the show back to me. And now I get to see up to 4 shows a week. Wonderful talent. We have a lot of amazing talent in Sydney and Australia. And a lot of them, of course, suffered a lot during COVID. And when we reopened after the first lockdown, we had a few shows that were cancelled before COVID, because of the lockdown. So we sort of tried to catch up, and this is where we started to do 5 shows a week. And we realized that there were so many artists that hadn't worked for a year and a half, sometimes 2 years, that they all wanted to come and do a little cabaret. We had some amazing performances here.
I know there's many that you would like to talk about, but can you name a few Sydney cabaret artists that have performed here that you would recommend people catch if they can?
Well, if you go to the theatre in Sydney at the moment to see either Moulin Rouge or Mary Poppins or every show that is in Sydney, one of the lead has performed at Claire's Kitchen. But we also have amazing people like Geraldine Turner, who is an absolute icon in Sydney. And she doesn't perform that much anymore, but she does 3 shows a year at Claire's Kitchen. She just loves it.
I saw Paul Capsis at a show.
Paul Capsis, Iota, and so many. And you.
Yes, I mean, with Chris Cody, Neil Abada. And they're not only seeing these amazing shows, they're having a 3-course French meal. Do you want to talk about the menu and maybe a bit about your history as a chef? Because I didn't even know you were a chef.
Oh, really?
I remember saying to begin with, who's the executive chef that I can put in the article? And you said, c'est moi.
Yeah, and you just got me in the kitchen finishing my soufflé and
so
the
what's your
chocolate
history
truffle
with food?
today.
I saw something about you. Your aunt used to take you to amazing restaurants. And you want to recreate. Tell me the story about you and food.
I always love food. I come from a background of, on one side of the family, French and Italian, on the other side, Ukrainian. And both of those groups love to entertain and love to have people around the table. So it was not unusual we used to have Sunday lunch, one Sunday at one side of the family, the other Sunday the next side. And it was not unusual to have 20, 30 people around the table. So I have very fond memories of my grandmothers preparing food in the Ukrainian kitchen, like all the little the dumpling in the Italian kitchen, fresh pasta hanging on string in the kitchen, waking up in the morning to that beautiful smell, and also the very slow cooked bolognese sauce that my grandmother used to cook for 2 days on a very, very low heat in the summer kitchen. But you still have the whole house full with those wonderful, wonderful smell. And those are very strong memories of my childhood. And then later on, I was introduced to more, sophisticated cooking and restaurants through one of my aunts who was the rich hand of the family and used to love going to all the star restaurants in France. And because we got on well, she took me with her and her husband, and we used to have wonderful meal, like in 3-hat Michelin restaurant. And I just fell in love with the atmosphere of the restaurant, with the style, with the food. So when I left school, I decided to do an apprenticeship. And I did École Hôtelière and an apprenticeship in a beautiful restaurant called the Bourgogne in Troyes in Champagne, but not in the kitchen. In the dining room, I was actually I was going to be a maître d'. Then I joined the army, forgot about all of that, moved to New Caledonia with the army, and on the way from the army, stopped in Australia, fell in love with the first minute I arrived in Australia with Australia, and stayed. The problem is I couldn't speak English, so they couldn't put me in a dining room to be a waiter. The chef was French in the first restaurant I worked to, so they put me in the kitchen, and that's how I learned how to cook.
Wow. So your first trip to Australia, what year was that?
1979 when I arrived in Australia.
Do you remember what Sydney felt like?
First, the heat, I love, after living in New Caledonia for a couple of years, I love the weather, there is no doubt. And I just felt the city was very open, even so at the time it was not as multicultural as it is now. It had still a sense of freedom that I really, really enjoyed. And also being part of the LGBTQI plus community, even so, once again, the law, it was still illegal and all of that. I discovered Oxford Street and all the different little club and the little cabaret room, and I just fell in love with that atmosphere. And it's amazing that practically the whole time I lived in Australia, I've never really went far away from Oxford Street. Most of my businesses have been walking distance to where we are now. So obviously I find a place where I felt like I belong.
And do you remember how it was different, like smells and
the
sounds
smell, not really much, but it was like I said, the heat, the quietness, because it was not a big city at the time, not as big as it is now. So being still, and the water too, being able to walk from wherever you are, like around where I live, to the water in 15 minutes and be on the harbor. My first partner and I had a little sailing boat, and every weekend we used to sail on the harbor. This is magic. This is something you cannot, find, especially where I came from in Champagne, middle of France, so there is no water there.
Yeah, I went on a yacht last week with a friend who's bought a yacht, and it was, oh my gosh, this is so incredible.
It's magic, isn't
around
it?
Shark Island.
Yeah, we did the same with my brother and his wife and my nephew and niece on the 2nd of January. Just they came to visit, and I've done it so many times, but I cannot help every time to just pinch myself and say, wow, I live in Sydney and I can do that any day of the week I choose to. This is quite extraordinary.
Well, if you have a friend over from France or Italy or somewhere else, what would the perfect 24 hours in Sydney be in your point of view?
Depending on the age group, but I try to push everybody to do the bridge climb because I think it's fantastic. Go to the Center Point Tower on the top because that gave you such an amazing bird-eye view of how the city is planned. Where the water is, and they're always amazed actually that the city stops at the water, but Sydney is actually a lot further west, like Sydney now, the center of Sydney is Parramatta, really, when you think of it. So they're always surprised of that. Try to see a show. There is some beautiful theater, and of course, go and visit the Opera House. I know that every person visiting, their first thing, they cannot believe they're actually next to the Opera House because they see it, in movies, on television, in magazine.
Fireworks.
But for them to be the fireworks, for them to be there in between the Opera House and the bridge, it's quite surreal. You feel like you are in a fantasy movie because we take it for granted, but it is an amazing building, beautiful building, very unusual. And also the bridge is quite extraordinary too, and the water. So you've got like all of that. So they need to do that, and of course come and have dinner at Claire's.
Obviously.
Un souvenir qui me poursuit sans cesse.
Let's go through the senses and just tell me the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Sydney and sight.
Okay, sight, the sun over the water. That bright sun, shining over the blue water and the blue sky. That's definitively what the sight of Sydney.
Sounds.
The sound, music at the Opera House, going to see a concert, going to see a show, just music. I love music, and amazingly enough, we have a good scene in Sydney. You can see a show practically every night of the week.
Tastes.
Taste. Taste is an interesting one because being a chef, I'm forever tasting food, but let's put me in. Taste will be salt water on my tongue after a swim and a chilled beer. Interesting, isn't it, for a chef? It's not food, yeah.
Smells.
Smell, eucalyptus. I just love the smell of eucalyptus.
And it clears your mind.
It does, yeah.
So touch.
Touch, that's another good one. Touch. my God, I'm not a very good swimmer, and I keep going back to the beach and everything. I like the touch of the sound, in between my fingers. And I often just lay down there and for hours just play with the sound falling through my fingers. So once again, back to the water.
Yeah, sound through your fingers. And finally, the sixth sense, something that you can't quite put your
Well, that's exactly what I felt the minute I put my foot on Australian soil. I arrived at the time we actually came down from the plane through stairs, right into the tarmac. It was a beautifully sunny day, and it was in April, but it was still very beautifully warm, sunny day. And I knew somehow that I will spend the rest of my life in Australia without speaking English, without even I've seen anything because I was still at the airport. I had that very overwhelming feeling that this is where I belonged. So this is definitively where I belonged. I've been here now for a lot of years. And so that will be that sixth sense of knowing where you belong.
Nice. I want to just ask what's coming up at Claire's.
We have a big season coming up. Sydney is hosting World Pride. It's the first time that a city in the Southern Hemisphere is hosting World Pride. The last few that I've hosted were New York and Amsterdam, and this is our turn, which means that it's going to be a celebration of LGBTQIA plus community with people coming from all over the world. They have over 600 events, and we have 16 cabaret nights at Claire's. So that's going to be a busy time. And we're showcasing such a wild, wonderful array of talent, from First Nation to Asian, bisexual, transsexual, non-binary, lesbian, gay, allies. We have covered with Miss Bev, with our talent coordinator, every flavor of that rainbow to perform on a little stage upstairs. And an exciting thing also, for 2 days on the 4th and the 5th of March, Oxford Street is being closed to traffic from Whitlam Square to Taylor Square. It's going to be a big street party. They're expecting about 50,000 people in the street. So we're actually putting the restaurant in the street and creating a little cabaret space for 40 people in the middle of Oxford Street. That's going to be something to look forward to. A lot of work, but a very exciting time.
Nice. And if people are looking at the menu, they don't know what to taste, it all looks good, what would be your top recommendations of what to taste at Claire's Kitchen?
Top recommendation is the cheese soufflé. I think we counted not long time ago because I didn't have anything to put on as a catch line for our newsletter. So I just thought, let's count roughly how many cheese soufflé I will have made in 11 years. And we said over 60,000 soufflé. So obviously it's a popular dish, and it's one of my specialties. I've been cooking the soufflé forever, so it's a sure dish to enjoy at Claire. And wonderful Australian seafood all the time. Beef, we are very well known. As a French restaurant, we serve beef. We cater for vegan too, but beef is a big thing on our menu. And we get the beef from a beautiful place called Greenham in Tasmania. It's grass-fed beef, it's beautiful. So we do it at a Chateaubriand, at a Rossini, braised riz bourguignon. Yeah, so those are the things that I will have. And the steak tartare, of course, the beef too. And I think we've been doing a good steak tartare for many years. I've been to Paris on a holiday, and every night of my trip I tried to steak tartare in different places, and still ours is still the best one.
And what's really good also is the petit fours.
Oh yes.
So good. Oh my
That's
gosh.
when you finish.
I can't wait to perform. Just have
At the cabaret, you got a little plate of mini dessert. That's the end of your cabaret.
So good. Well, I'm really looking forward to coming back and performing.
I can't wait to have you on that stage.
Yes, it's going to be wonderful with your beautiful audience, beautiful chefs and service. And hopefully everyone else can come and
Visit our little cabaret room upstairs.
see.
Thank you, Ruby.
À bientôt.
À bientôt.
I hope you enjoyed this chat with Marc Kuzma. And that beeping, by the way, it wasn't a delivery truck, but the soufflé. They're ready. We run into the kitchen and whip them out of the oven in perfect timing. They look and smell delicious.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Sense in the City Sydney with Marc Kuzma at Claire's Kitchen. Read the show notes for links to the venue and to the places and events mentioned by Marc. Check out more episodes of Sense in the City on your favourite podcast app or on the website senseinthe.city. You can also follow us on Instagram at Sense in the City Sydney and on Facebook at Sense in the City World. Sense in the City is produced by Pilot Media and Ruby TV.